everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Biometrics Leadership Lab. We're here to support you on your biometrics journey, giving you the tools and knowledge you need to grow from lead to leader. Today, we are continuing on with our 20 Things series with 20 Things Your Data Manager Wants You to Know. I'm very excited today because we have both CRO and sponsor side representation. Thank you for joining us live, and if you're watching a replay, thank you for taking the time to catch up. You can ask questions on the event notice on LinkedIn, and we will see them while we're live, but we can't respond in writing. So we'll either get to your question during the broadcast or follow up afterwards. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce both myself and I am Amanda Cross, founder of Cross Coaching and Consulting, an executive biometrics consulting agency dedicated to helping small to mid-sized companies and teams deliver biometrics in a better way. With decades of experience in clinical research, from statistician to chief operating officer, I leverage my cross-functional experience and training to help teams integrate, communicate, collaborate in order to improve their service delivery. I also help functional leaders professionally develop themselves and their teams. I'm going to throw it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. First up, Audrey.
Thank you, Amanda. So hi, everyone. I'm Audrey Erasmus. I'm the Senior Director of the Project Management Office at Bioforum. So while I do currently lead a global project management team, my career actually began in clinical data management, which is the foundation that has shaped how I approach project delivery, always with a strong focus on data quality, cross-functional collaboration, and then understanding the needs of both the clinical and the data management, as well as the data behind the study.
Thank you. Deb?
Hi, I'm Deb Cole, and I am the Associate Director of Data Management at AskBio. Throughout my career, which probably spans as many decades as Amanda's, I have worked from the very beginning of data management on paper studies back in the day, all the way up through EDC. I've worked both sponsor and CRO side, and I have enjoyed bringing the standards and collaborative teamwork to my studies. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael Inkman, Senior Director at Galectin Therapeutics. We specialize in NASH, MASH related cirrhosis. I've got 20 plus years experience, both CRO and large and small pharma, currently very small pharma. And I'm excited to see what direction this industry keeps moving.
Thank you. And Johan?
Hi everyone, I'm Johan Vermeulen, Senior Director, Clinical Data Sciences at Bioforum. I cannot say that I have decades of experience, but over a decade on the CRO side of data management. I've worked my way through various roles on the data management side, and I'm really passionate about where the industry is going from data management to data sciences, as I'm really passionate about process optimization, innovation, and continuous improvement, with the mindset of people first always, as I really truly believe that any success lies within a team. Yes, that's me.
Thank you. Before we talk about our 20 things, I've asked each of our panelists to be prepared to give a one-sentence statement about what they think data management does. Audrey, you're up first.
Okay, so for me, data management is sort of the backbone of clinical research. It's the one team that really works with all of the different functional groups to make sure that the decisions that we make is really based on clean, reliable data that that everyone can trust.
Deb?
So for me, I see data management as being that group which is focused on getting the data in and acquiring data from third-party vendors. But I also look at it from a standpoint of how can I make the entry of this data or the collection of this data easier for the sites and for the patient. So looking at standardization, looking at exactly what do we need to show that our drug or our therapy is both safe and efficacious without adding to the patient burden.
Perfect. Thank you. Michael.
Yes, so I would say in 2 words, it's data stewardship. And that and in the past it was narrow data stewardship to the data that's being inputted into EDC, and now it's expanded to all the data that it's touching, right? So anything it interacts with, anything that we're inputting or exporting, or all those things, we're now stewards of that data.
Okay, Johan.
From my perspective, DM is often seen, and it's a term that I use, but is seen as a basement department, a quiet engine, right? But actually, it's not that. DM is a critical driver for me for quality, integrity, and I would say providing clarity in clinical research.
Thank you. And I want to say you guys have done a really great job setting up our first of the 20 things, which I've grouped according to general category. And the first thing I'm going to throw up is actually a category and a real statement that data management wants people to understand. Data management does more than query. We don't get paid by query in most cases. We don't sit around drinking afternoon coffee trying to come up with the most complicated, confusing query in the world. It is a part of the job, but there's so much more. So what do you guys have to say? Data management is more than a query.
You want to start us off, Johan?
Yes, I would like to say that what's interesting is I have team members in my team that is from the clinical side, for example, and that was specifically what they thought, that DM raises queries just to raise queries. And when they joined this side, they see there's a purpose of integrity for these irritating, repetitive queries. So yes, a query has a backstory. It's not just trying to be difficult.
I think as well, as it relates to data management where we started, and Deb, you can maybe also give some more insights into that, but it is maybe where it started, where data management started with just like, this is a query, this is what you're looking at, and you just raise a query for the sake of raising it. But the role has evolved so much over time that where we are at today, yes, there's queries, but there's so much thought that goes into the listings that we program, how we do the reconciliation. We've moved away from just blatantly raising a bunch of queries into looking into data from a holistic perspective. So where we are at today, if there's a query that comes from your data manager, there's really a lot of thought from a collective team that went into why we are raising that specific query, which includes input from your statistician. If we talk about looking at cleaning critical data, a project manager maybe. It's not just a data manager sitting there copying and pasting a query text from somewhere into an EDC.
Yeah, and I think you've taken most of my points there. But, data management, when we are looking at the build of the study, we are thinking about what are those critical data fields, what is going to show, what does BIOS need, and what does medical need to show that the drug or therapy is safe or efficacious. And we're going to focus our queries on those, but we're getting that input, like you said, from the biostats team, from the medical team, from the clinical team as to what actually needs to be queried. We're not in a vacuum, just setting up documents. Everybody is part of the team, just as we are part of the review of the statistical plans and the clinical plans and even the protocol, because as you had said earlier, that we start with quality, and it begins at the very beginning. What's in the protocol and how can we collect that data in a quality way and a standardized way so that we can do the analysis on it, or the stats team can do the analysis on it. everything is just tied together, and we don't work independently. We're so much into everybody else, like little spiders going out.
And I think that's a great segue. Oh, go ahead.
I want to link something that Dave just said, because there's a different view on this as well from a DN perspective. Sometimes the data is just what it is. So from a stats perspective, the data management team would oftentimes get queries like, this is not correct, like we can't use it, but it has been queried. And sometimes we need to work with the data as it is. We cannot continue to ask the same question to the site about a specific data point. If that's what it is, then we need to find a way to also work with that. So yes, we query, but at some point we also need to say, listen, we cannot query this anymore. We have confirmation from the site. It does match source documentation, and we need to work with that if it's a deviation or however we need to document it.
Yep.
Yeah, great point. Because I always like to say data management is responsible for making sure the data is accurate. Is the data accurately reflecting what happened at the site?
Yeah.
And that's an oversimplistic way, but I think you guys have really segued nicely into the second point, which data management is more than data cleaning, right? I think back in the day when Deb and I started and they scratched data on stone tablets, as I like to say, it was a lot of just data cleaning, right? But there's so much more to it now. So share, please, what people are doing besides just writing queries.
Yeah.
You can go.
Yeah. So for example, we're involved in the QTL, right? QTL creation, quality tolerance limits. What is acceptable risk? It's been years since I haven't been included in a risk management meeting, right? Because it always ends up, they don't include us in the beginning, and then they realize as soon as they get into the data cleaning bit that they've neglected some of those potential risks, right? Oops, we didn't get that data from vendor X or those sorts of things. It's also making there's a fair amount of UAT, right? I've done UAT in ePro systems, IRT systems, right? It's been long known that those systems are a little bit too complicated for one person to test out by themselves, right? Some individual on ClinOps, that sort of thing, to look through their specs. So yeah, we do all these things that are peripheral to the data cleaning as well.
And I would even add, like, one of the big things that some of my teams have not realized is we're looking at audit trails to see if there's something jumping out where the system's not working the way it should be working, or someone's in there that shouldn't be in there, or they're touching data that they shouldn't be in. And I know with the latest release of the ICH guidelines, there's a lot of focus on that, and I've been part of Elizabeth's presentations. She's with the Danish regulatory agency talking about it, but we're looking at so much more than what we used to look at. It's not just the data that's sitting in EDC, it's what's going on behind the scenes in all of those systems too.
I agree, Deb. I want to say that I think that's where the data management landscape changed a lot, right? We are actually, everything we see is not resulting in a query anymore. It's being proactive in identifying risks and discussing it with the right stakeholders, because cleaning is for DM a primary responsibility, but we need all stakeholders to ensure the quality and integrity of the data.
Yep.
And that's what ties this together, right? Because Michael started with the QTLs, and then Deb went to the audit trials, and then you to the holistic review. But data management is involved in every one of those aspects, but in collaboration with different stakeholders.
Yep.
And I think that's the one thing that the industry that we move towards that hasn't been easy to navigate, but it's getting away from this siloed approach of each of the teams, that your statistician only gets involved once we have the database lock, once they start looking for their programming. And you only work with your build team during amendments or the build phase. each one of the roles within data management, but also the other functional stakeholders, becomes so much more important with the data management team as a focus point, or sort of the glue that brings it together. So yes, we are involved in interpreting the protocol and following quality by design principles and making sure that we capture the data that we need for analysis. But in order for the data management team to accurately do that, we need the sponsor, we need the statistician, we need the medical monitors that's going to be looking at the data. We need to understand which of the vendors are going to be involved. What do we need to do with that data? And if we are involved from the beginning of the trial, that really helps us get to that end goal successfully.
Yep.
Yeah, and I put up, because you guys are all tying the thread together, that everything data management is doing now is about data integrity. Not just is it clean and making sense in and among itself, but how much integrity can we put behind the data? And before you go to that, I just want to kind of highlight something that Audrey said, because I've done these 20 things through almost all of the functions in biometrics, and everybody voices the same thing. Please get us involved early. And I always say data is not a downstream service, right? It's integral. That's why you run the study. So it's interesting to see all these themes come out. Talk a little bit more around data integrity and how that's guiding what you do, so much more beyond just data sense, if you will.
Yeah, so I wanted to point out that because this is all of our goal and our target, right? The querying is all we do is actually the opposite of what we want, right? If all we're doing is querying, that means we don't have much data integrity, or at least faith in that data, right? And therefore, we're worried about the data integrity. Ideally, we see very few queries per patient and page, right? That's our goal. And I think, that all starts from even at as early as the protocol design, right? That's some of the new guidance in ICH, right? To try to build quality in design into the protocol. And then certainly CRF design, right? If you have a poor CRF design, then you're going to have a lot more trouble downstream, right? So when you're pulling in vendors and things or data management, and let's say everything's already built already, there's only, that limits very much how much improvement you can make on it, right? Because you're already at a sort of certain level of integrity, and then you can only tweak it, as opposed to wholesale.
Yeah, I think that's the one gap for me that we still, as an industry, need to work on, because I think the collaboration between data management and stats has got a lot better. But with the QTLs and that being, so at ACDM last year, they actually said it would be great if we can have that during the regulatory discussion in the protocols already. And without data management being involved with the statistician at that point, specifically on a CRO side, we usually get the protocol and then we have to work with it. But it would be really great if data management can actually be part of that protocol setup, because we do have great insights and experience that we can add to the protocol design, and that would avoid additional costs and amendments at a later stage.
And I would add to that protocol trainings, right? If the sponsor is writing it, at least make sure you get a thorough training, so that, let's say you have an unusual endpoint. How do we collect that data, right? You could guess, or you could collaborate, right? So.
And I'm so glad to hear you say that. And it's gonna take us to the next one, is to think of data management as your strategic partner. And I think there's a tendency, picking up what Audrey said, that the CRO just gets the protocol, and it's refreshing, I would say, to hear my goal-setting sponsor side say, ask the question if you don't understand what specifically is in the protocol. And there can sometimes be a hesitation on the CRO side to do that because you don't want to be seen as expert, or you don't want to be seen as less than the expert. You don't want to be seen as not knowing your job. But overall, the goal is to deliver something that's going to accurately get the data that's necessary to meet the hypothesis in the protocol. So, but I think talk about a little bit more about being a strategic partner and not just a service provider or downstream service.
I think from a CRO perspective, to be seen as a strategic partner, change the game. It gives you insights to information that we might not know. And I often think of it when we get a deadline from a sponsor saying you need to go live on 5 June, but we don't know what their drive exactly is. We just see 5 June, but first patient in is 16 June, and we don't understand the more, and that really applies to the broader spectrum. If we can have more insights earlier on, that helps us to really be a partner in crime for the sponsor.
Yeah, and that's what I've brought from having been a sponsor, then went to the CRO, and now back at the sponsor side. I try to give my CRO partner the backstory of why we're doing what we're doing. You know, like we have to have a patient in by this time because this is driving X down the road. We have to have the database live, or we have to have CRFs. Usually that's what it is, because we have a couple of sites that are part of our program that require that we have the CRFs as part of their IRB submission. And so we can't get them up and running unless we've got CRFs. So that bringing people together and giving them the information that they need to do their job and understand why they're doing their job is critical. Even, you know, on the sponsor side as a DM, why do you need this in the protocol? What is this telling you? And I'll take that question back to my stats team, to my medical writing team, to my clin dev team all the time. What is this trying to tell you? Why are we collecting this same piece of information across multiple QOLs? What is each one of these going to tell you? So always looking for why.
I think if we talk about a strategic partnership, and I mean, all of us that's now having this discussion have more than a decade of experience, but we might have someone in the audience that is still learning. And if I think back, and even now I've been at the bigger CRIs, now the smaller CRI, your customers that you have repeat business with and that you have good relationships with are the ones that you are open to having open discussions, being proactive, but providing clarity as to where you are, what you can do. And you often end up coming to a solution in collaborating with that sponsor or that specific vendor that's a little bit outside of the box, but you make it work. And that's how you build on that partnership. And that's how you create a long-lasting partnership with a specific vendor or with a specific sponsor. We tend to, specifically on the CRO side, like Johan mentioned, be concerned about asking a question. I think, Amanda, you said, we don't want to ask a question because we want to look like the experts. We need to know what we're doing. Then you end up assuming something wrong, and it creates a downstream effect. So I'm very pro, there's no such thing as a wrong question in any kind of setup. If you don't know, then you don't know. Don't be scared. If you don't want to ask it in front of a client, ask your internal team. I don't understand why we are doing this. There might be something that you question that results in a different approach or a different way of doing something, or maybe a different decision being made that can really build that long-term relationship and that can help prevent a future amendment or something. So always be pro-question. That really helps to build relationship, and be open and transparent in your communication. Being open and transparent in communication doesn't mean that you're being rude or just saying no. It's being honest about what your team is capable of at this point and working with whoever it is, your vendor, a sponsor, a CRO, and coming up with a collaborative solution to meet the goal that everyone is working towards.
Yeah, I always say, like, well, the stupid question is the question that doesn't get asked. And also, if you said, if you don't want to ask in a big meeting, find somebody you trust internally and ask the question. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to have the conversation. And when I found talking to sponsors, maybe even in a smaller setting, just get out of email and into conversation with people when there's a point of confusion, because 35 plus years on, I still use words that I think make perfect sense to me, only to find out somebody else is using those same words to mean something completely different. And so until you can actually have that back and forth and say, when I say DRF, I mean this, and everybody's talking about the same thing, and that will help everybody be a partner together. This is the last
acronyms, because the acronyms is different across the different sponsors and CRI. So that's a very good point.
Okay, next up in the first part of our section here is data management for submission, not just a single database lock.
Oh yeah, definitely. I am living that right now. My team, I would say they think that I'm living towards this single lock that's at the end of this year, but it's the first lock that is going to feed our submission that's coming in a few more years. So I am sitting there looking, and I learned this very early on, like, my goal is not to lock a database. My goal is to have that data be able to go to the regulatory agencies and show that what I've been working on for X number of years is safe and efficacious and can be approved. So I'm always looking forward towards that, because it's not just the lock that you have to get through. You got to get to the ISS, the ISE, whatever names they put on it, what other documents they need. And yeah, but I'm there right now. 4 years from now, there's a submission somewhere in my future, but I've got the lock this year. So little milestones to get to the big milestone. And I'm talking with my hands, and y'all can't see it over here.
So I've got 2 points for this. One is, as protocol design becomes more adaptive, right? It's automatically not one lock anymore, right? Mm-hmm. If you have rollover studies, it's sort of a lock, and then a second lock. And you may have Bayesian statistics and things which adjust when that lock will happen, right? So it's not about that one lock. Mm-hmm. And the other piece is, I've viewed for a long time data management's role to increase the speed at which you can get a submission. If you lock that database, but then you're missing pieces of critical data, and then you have to go back to sites, you've really accomplished not much, right? Because you're trying to save time. That's the whole point, right? To make sure you have data integrity and save time for the submission later. So if you've locked, but you haven't achieved either of those goals, then it's really not the target.
So I wanted to also say, with the adaptive designs that we now have, it's exactly that. It's not just one lock, but based on personal experience, in my previous role, we were focused on this single study. And I think that's something that, as industry leaders of teams, we need to make sure that our teams actually understand what it means to go to submission. That it means we have several studies that's going to be combined together and then go for submission. If the teams do not have that understanding of what it means, they don't understand what we are working towards. And I didn't know that while I was in my previous role. We focused on the one study, getting it done, and then I started working on actual submissions, and I had to learn how the different studies come together over several years that were done, and then it makes so much more sense. So I think if you are managing a team just of data managers or even junior statisticians, it's important for everyone to understand what it means to go to submission and why it's so important from the first phase of the study up into the final phase and how it all ties in together. I don't know, Johan, I think for us, your team specifically, when we started working on this, it opened up a whole new world for us because it wasn't something that we were privy to in the past.
Definitely, Audrey. I was just thinking, I mean, if in the audience we maybe have a data manager that's in DM for 2 years, and the final goal for you early in your career is database lock, just like the question asked, and there's so much more. And I think it is important for us to reiterate the end goal and help them to see the bigger picture of what's the end goal.
Yeah, and I think
And
for individuals that's not just data managers, I mean, we have teams that consist of junior and more senior team members. So yes, you might have a junior team member that doesn't get the picture, but your data management team consists of both groups of those. So we do get the bigger picture and we do understand what you are working towards.
And I think too, just to kind of loop back from a CRO perspective, you may be working on a couple of studies or a study for a sponsor, but they may have more studies out there with other CROs. So from a sponsor perspective, making sure everybody has that same information. Look, we're not just working towards a lock, we're working towards a submission, but then remembering that there's going to be more data out there. And sometimes there are decisions made for a study because of a lesson learned on a study that's locked that you don't have any insight to. You don't have line of sight to it. So,
and I think it's a great reminder. If you're CRO side and you have just 1 or 2 studies, have that conversation with your sponsor. What are you doing in the other studies? And this becomes even more important if there isn't a data management counterpart at your sponsor, right? Obviously, Deb and Michael work for very forward-thinking companies because they have data managers there. But I think there's some where you've got a team of like 3 or 4 people and they're all ClinOps maybe, or just, the person who discovered the molecule. Help them by asking, would you have any other studies? What are they doing for this in your other studies? Because the more you can standardize and keep it consistent now, the easier it will be to manage submission. And they might be thinking, we got to get that first person in, or the investors. In 6 months, they'll be thinking, how are we going to get to submission? And that's what the investors want to know, how fast that timeline can be.
Right,
okay.
along with that goal of trying to speed up that submission, right? If you have 3 studies run by 3 different CROs and they're all doing things differently with different leaders, right? Then you're not really moving towards that goal of submitting together, right?
Yeah.
So the data manager really needs to know what you are planning to do with your data. That's the
They do, and I think on CRO side, I think if you're not getting that sense from your sponsor, start trying to work to figure that out with them. You can go through your internal project manager. If you've got a good relationship with the sponsor, you can go yourself. But what else is going on? And are there any other lessons you can implement on our study that you're seeing in your other studies? Okay, moving on to data management, the partnership. And I'm laughing because Audrey was asking about my cat earlier, and he's right over here now off screen trying to participate because he has a lot to say about data management. Okay, but the next section is all about data management is a partnership. They're not a standalone group, they work in partnership. So this is the first one is data management cannot design CRFs alone. I mean, they could, but it would not be ideal.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. If we're doing some sort of imaging data, and most of us don't have a lot of experience with a lot of different types of imaging data, right? And we're trying to put it into standardized form, right? We're going to need some help designing that, right? And that might be emailing, your medical monitor to say, what would be out of range, what would be an unsafe value, what would be totally invalid, right? Currently, we're working on FibroScans, for example, at my current company, where we're checking liver stiffness. Before I started this job, I had no idea what that was, right? And I certainly didn't know that there was an interquartile range that could say that value was, just should be discarded because it wasn't close enough to the liver, right? So without that discussion, how would I know that, right? And that's, I think, a lot, especially at the CRO where you're bouncing around indications more often. I think you definitely need that sort of support in the beginning, right? And that's with the CRF design. Once that's designed, then everything becomes downstream harder to deal with.
Yep.
And I think it also ties in with our previous discussion very nicely, right? Because we can design based on the protocol, and we can do it brilliantly. But now you have another study with another CRO and you want to go to submission. So you want that if it's similar CRFs, you want the same design to make it easier. So if you have a specific design in mind from a sponsor's perspective, we need that input. And then the same from the stats perspective. If you need to analyze endpoint data in a specific way, or you need specific data points to do the analysis, we need that input from you as a statistician. So I know it's easier now with the statisticians becoming more involved during that initial design phase and looking at the CRFs, but for the statisticians, we really rely on you guys to review it properly and give your input, because if amendments really is difficult, if data is already in there, it becomes costly. So the more input that we have from the different functional groups, even from a clinical perspective, sometimes you design a form and it looks amazing, but it's really terrible to complete at the site level. So, and there's CRAs or site personnel that really have that insight on, listen, I've had this done on another study, it just didn't work. We need that input. Without that input, we cannot design it better.
I want to make the same statement, but saying that sometimes we're so focused on trying to show that we know, whether we're the sponsor or the CRO. If you think about how many times there was this complex questionnaire that no one actually knew exactly what it had to include, but we were too proud to say it, where I would say, instead of seeing it as a racetrack and we try to compete on who's going to get the best out there first, let's see it as a journey and be transparent and say, listen, we're not sure, but X, Y, and Z needs to be around the table. Let's figure it out.
Yeah, and I've had some cases where I've had teams where the diary or a questionnaire has been designed by somebody outside of data management and outside of stats. It looks beautiful, and it's exactly what they want to see, and it's fairly easy for the patient to complete. However, it's next to impossible for programmers to manipulate and get aligned how they need it to be aligned to do the analysis. So if it's collecting data, the people who are going to use it, there's a lot of viewpoints that need to go into it. This is my favorite one. Data review is not a data management only activity.
This is my favorite one too, Amanda, because we're in a couple of companies I've had this discussion, data managers are not medical staff. We are not MDs. When we look at the data, we're looking for inconsistencies, but we can't sit there and tell you that something was done appropriately from a medical perspective. So I have been working on educating teams that, we have to have a holistic review of the data, and we have to do it before we get to database lock. That's the wrong time to be doing a holistic review. Let's do it earlier. Let's do it more frequently if possible. And I see that bearing out in the more recent work that I've done, is that, safety is looking at data, medical is looking at data, ClinOps is looking at data. They may be looking for different things, but all of us together are getting to that quality that we talked about earlier, so that we know that our data is ready.
Deb, if you were not so far away, I would have given you a high five, really. It's something that I feel also very strong about. And I think if we look at some new changes now, you touched on it earlier, but the metadata and the audit trail reviews, that's specifically like user access management. And even if we think about not only EDC, there's so much to be seen in the data and not only the data that data management needs to review, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot work to be done on this in terms of trying to look at sorts of pseudo biomarkers, right? Compared to how sick your patient is, right? There's no way data management's going to know for a while, right? For maybe a year of exposure, that for liver cirrhosis, that ELF data correlates in any way to your FibroScan, right? How would I have known that? But the cirrhosis medical monitor, just assumes, oh well, of course, everyone knows this, right? That's what I've been trained on. So I think there's this assumption in each of the silos, DM2, right? That people just sort of know what your role is and know some of that expertise that you do. But really, there's a lot of folks who have no idea what data management does or what the medical monitor is supposed to be looking at, right? In that particular trial or design.
And I think we will be getting to this also a little bit later, but it just needs to be clear to everyone that yes, the data management role is evolving, but we're not evolving into the realm of medical monitoring. So we are evolving in the way that we look at the data and looking for trends within the data, but we're at no point going to be able to connect liver cirrhosis with a specific whatever it is you mentioned. And the fact of the matter is that we work on, in a CRO level, we work on so many different therapeutic areas that we really need that medical input when it comes to aspects that really relates to medical. So we, will evolve, but it's really related to the data and looking at trends in the data and not into becoming medical experts.
Right, and to that end too, like let's say you have a questionnaire, right? The scale might be 1 to 10, and it might be logical and fairly obvious that somebody shouldn't go from 1 to 10 to 1, right? But what is reasonable within that 1 to 10 range? Certainly, we don't know, right? So we can give you the data analytics that say, look, we had this percentage of subjects have a 3-point swing in 2 visits, but is that meaningful? How do we know?
All right, and moving on, and I'm gonna put Michael on the spot for this one because this was his. That all stakeholders should be involved in the quality plan. And what I'm going to put you on the spot for is level set for people what you mean by the quality plan.
Yes. So the quality plan, is something that should involve the whole holistic team and include the QTLs, quality tolerance limits, and their acceptable levels, right? Now, data management often can help suggest some of these QTLs, right? A certain percentage of loss to follow-up subjects, a certain percentage of ET subjects based on the protocol, right? But at least beyond phase 2, when you go into phase 3, someone has to do a statistical analysis on this to see what was important from the previous phases of trial. So it certainly can't just be on all DM or all clinical, right? And DM's role is usually to pull those numbers for people and make some suggestions, not to build all that quality in, right? And because of that, history of queries and data integrity being key to data management, right? Some people assume that it's basically our role, which I think is contrary to where things are supposed to be moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think though it goes back to what we've been saying all the way through this, Amanda, is that data management is not a silo. We don't know everybody else's jobs. We can't know everybody else's jobs. It just doesn't work that way. And so if everybody on the team, if all the functions on the team are involved in it, your data has so much more integrity to stand on when you're sitting there at the end of your study, at the end of your submission, talking to the FDA or the regulatory authorities about it. Everybody feels comfortable with the data and can say, yeah, we did the best job we could do here. Here is our data. Take it. We think it works.
And I would point ICH E6R2 also put in a little bit of teeth into those plans, right? So you have to document why you didn't meet any of those quality tolerance, right? So if we, as DM, come up with an arbitrary number that we think sounds good, right? Sounds industry standard, right? Then someone still has to explain it in the CSR, and it's not really going to be us. So I think they need to we need broader stakes earlier in that, right? I know the ideal is before first subject in, right? But certainly you need it way earlier in the process than most of the teams I've been on have started. And then on top of that too, I noticed there's in E3 now a suggestion that you need that guidance at the sponsor, regardless of their size. So you need you're going to be needing a data manager and a biostatistician even on your small phase 2, right, where you're still trying to figure out the dosing level and things at the beginning, as opposed to, say, when Amanda and I are often brought in when the data's a bit messy and enrollment's done, and now what?
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, what R3 is doing is re-emphasizing and moving more towards requiring active data surveillance and active, I mean, I can say data management, but in a broader sense, right? People have to be responsible for what's going on with the data at the sponsor and at the CRO. I love this one because it's my background as well. But we love biostats, and I think that nothing makes me happier just when I'm working full time than seeing data management and statistics and programming all talking to each other, because you all have the same end goal ultimately, which is to show what happened in the study. But I think some of what was here is how data management can partner with statistics, reviewing the SAP, reviewing the table shelves, and understanding how their programming is evolving to match how the data management is going along.
I think it's contrary to popular belief, right? We do love biostats. And I think it comes back to sort of the theme of collaborative working. If we understand what you need, we can really help you get there. So we are not, data managers do not want to make things difficult. We really want to help you. And if we know what you need, we can help you get that. So.
Yeah, but I'm going to, sorry.
No, Deb, I always just say that biostats help data management to focus on what is important or to know what is important. Sorry, Deb.
No, I was just going to add, I love my biostats people, I really do. I just want you all to look at the data earlier. Don't wait until the last patient's enrolled into the study to say, oh yeah, now we're going to start programming TLS.
So funny on the stat programming one that I did, they one of their items to know was for data management to understand that they're not responsible for data cleaning, that they look at data differently. And so you shouldn't wait till, you shouldn't hold your cleaning until programming starts looking at it. And guys are not necessarily contradicting each other, because you're all doing work for different things, but we all know programmers are going to find things when they start trying to standardize the data into CDS format or generate those TFLs. And so data management is like, yeah, we'd love to know that more than 3 weeks before lock. And at the same time, it's funny to see how the themes are consistent. I
think that it's partly because the roles are almost opposite, right? So we do all of our, programming and searching for what's wrong, right? and stats programming is doing the exact opposite, right? They're trying to patch it all together no matter how messy it is.
Yeah.
So I think probably those two different, points of view are feeling that sort of difference.
It's a very good point. And I think, we do look at things, we do look at different things. That's also important to understand. And if we collaborate earlier, we can align more on what we are looking at, right?
Yeah.
That's in the past, it was really completely different, but now we've moved to this approach where we want to understand what the statistician needs, and we can clean the data earlier, and then you don't have to find the issues. But again, the data is never going to be 100% perfect match to fit into your program.
Yeah, and then to that end, on the sponsor that I'm with now, DM and Biostats are in all the same meetings together. Like Biostats is sitting in the DM call so that they hear these issues that we're seeing with the data early on. They can hear about patients that maybe have something that will look odd when they go to put their tables, figures, and listings together, and so that they are just as much in that data from maybe a little bit higher level, but they're not getting it at the last minute and then having to ask the question. They're already in the know for everything, and I like that. I like sitting with my biostats team and being able to go through everything. Yeah,
and that's a great segue to our next one, which is we should advocate for each other. I'm a huge proponent of, especially within biometrics, the roles having a basic understanding of what their other functions are doing, because you guys are all in it together. But then you can start to hear something being said in a meeting, and that oh yeah, that might matter to the other side. So it's important for data management to advocate for stats, and stats to advocate for data management.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a great example of where this didn't happen, and it gave us sort of a hilarious anecdote. So I was building a database maybe a dozen years ago, and it was EDC, but they wanted to add this paper survey for Beck's depression. It was a vitamin D nutritional. I asked them, build as fast as you can. All right, so I built it as fast as I could. We include these hundreds of pages. We have to do all the manual double entry, right, because it's paper. Then when the results come out, basically shows nothing, because A, it wasn't a depression study, B, there was no control for depression, and C, so they didn't come in depressed, they didn't leave depressed. What kind of results did you get, right? So then, I asked the clinical director why we added this, and they said, well, the preclinical team said the dogs were the happiest we'd ever seen. So I asked the question is now, why are we including this data? Why? What purpose does this serve? Is there enough control that it'll give us any value?
Happy dogs.
I think we could, we should advocate for each other, even if the roles are not, if both roles are not within the CRI or both are not within the sponsor. We need to understand, and I'm not saying you need to understand how to program, but you need to understand what they do. And it's important for the other teams to understand what data management does and what we need, because then if you have a basic understanding, and I must say, Amanda, this is really something that I learned from working with you, how important that is to have that basic understanding of the different functional roles. And that sometimes mean that you have to get out of your comfort zone and spend some time with someone that you don't usually work with on a daily basis, but to get some insights and understand why they are being difficult about a certain aspect of the design or whatever. Because as Deb mentioned earlier, if you have that background information or just a general understanding of it, it just makes you understand what you need to do and why you need to do it.
All right, we've got time for one more, and I just want to say we've barely made it halfway through the 20 in data management. So probably watch out for part 2 of this.
I think this is because, Amanda, like when you go to the presentations, I always used to remember the the bid defenses when I was with the CRO. Everybody else got to speak except for BIOS and DM, and we finally get to speak, and we just want to speak.
I know. In fact, one of the topics that pulled very highly for me was the 5-minute bid defense, which is how to be effective in biometrics at the last 5 minutes of the bid defense. And so that's the topic.
Good topic.
On one of these broadcasts, because it is true. So we're going to do one more. We're going to close it out, but please do watch for a part 2 of this one, because it's very interesting, and I'm
going to catch up on that 5-minute one too later.
Yeah, they're really happy to give a voice to data management. And the last one that we're going to do in this section, which is help us automate data cleaning. And so I think, Michael, this was yours. That if programming can help out.
Yes, so I'm a big advocate for clearing out some of that manual drudgery, right? And if it requires me to shift some hours around so that we have some SAS programming support or some other sort of programming support, right? Build those listings, do less of that manual review of AE to ConMed, all these things that are so incredibly standard. I would much rather spend the resource on that and make sure that process is working. We are happy to, in my experience anyways, I'm happy to spec out any of these reports, right? If it means my team isn't going to have to do that same review 12 times manually, I will happily spend those hours or a day specking those reports out so that we can automate this, and also, it also gives you less trouble later, right? Because you're not missing things at the end, right? You're able to be more proactive. You're able to get some of that cleaning done earlier, right? Because you're automated it, and then you can just be more efficient, right? When you have that last run as well, instead of taking a week because you're manually reviewing 93 listings, maybe you're doing, a half a dozen manual listings and then these nice built reports, it just makes everything better downstream.
From a DM operational perspective, I think that's definitely a big goal for us to focus on working smarter, not only faster, but in collaboration with stats. Because at the end of the day, we sometimes spend so much time on tedious, repetitive work that there's really important things that needs that attention and time, so that we use automation to work smarter, to really focus on what is important. I strongly believe that in my team as well, that there's always a better way to do something.
But we shouldn't have 80 programmed listings and then 30 of them doesn't have any output because we didn't think about what we want to program, right? So that's how it used to be. Like, we just programmed everything. So yes, automate, but think about spending that automation or that resources for the programming wisely on the listings, like the ConMeds and A comparisons. That's really tough to review manually, and don't just program everything.
Right. You don't need that many program depth listings if you're doing a nutritional, right?
and be able to go back and look at them. You talked about the ones that don't give you any output. Is there something wrong with it? So just because you program them, as you get more data, you're still going to have to go back and make sure that they are actually finding the things that you want, or that you're getting the output, because the more data you get in, the more likely it is you're going to have those little one-off outliers that are sitting out there and they never get caught. So you want to be able to look for them. I know a lot of companies, when I was at SCDM last year, were talking about using AI to go through their data, especially as you're looking across studies within a program. And so I see that coming. We definitely need some more tools. I think a little bit more tools and a little bit more guidance. This is still new to us. We need to be able to say that it's helping us with data integrity, as we were talking about earlier, but anything that helps us get away from that manual review, because each person is going to look at something a little bit differently. If we can standardize it, be there, and then focus on those critical fields and those critical data points where we need more eyes on it, then I think, we're moving the right direction there.
I think sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think the AI thing is so interesting because it's one thing to say, oh, AI can do this for us. Great. What does that really look like? And, there's a big gap for me right now between AI will do it and AI actually.
And I kind of like the medium in terms of data management, and because of I like data science, right? It's where someone is leading that AI and making the decisions from the AI, right? As opposed to the AI telling us what we should be doing or working on.
All right, round robin of last word that you want to highlight from today's discussion. Deb?
My last word is data management's not going anywhere. Our role is just evolving as more types of data and more volume of data is coming in for these studies.
Audrey?
Final thought for me, data management is a partnership. It's planning and getting it right from the start. And if we really make an effort to understand the different roles, we will set ourselves up for smoother studies and better outcomes.
Johan?
From my end, I would say the golden thread through this would be that the trust, building a good foundation, at the end of the day will enable the fact that we can, as all stakeholders, join a journey together and not handle a clinical trial as a racetrack.
Michael?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, so certainly collaboration has been a key point. I think that last point is really interesting too, though, that so I'm a big board game enthusiast, and there are games that are built for strategy and there are games that are built for racing, right? In that you want to get done first versus maybe score more points, right? We're definitely targeting scoring more points as opposed to getting done first, right? Like that for us is the ultimate goal. Make sure that quality is there and not just that it's, and that it's fit for purpose.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like the medium in between on the race versus quality. Right?
All right, I want to say thank you to my guests today for having this really energetic conversation around data management. I will be out with more information about how to catch part 2 and what that might look like. I'm really glad that data management had a chance to come and speak. It's the critical data glue that holds everything we're doing together, and I think sometimes they're just shunted off downstream. So welcome to data management. I'll be watched. There'll be a recap coming out in our newsletter, and I'd like to thank again everybody for attending and for everybody's participation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.